Call 911 now. She's turning blue, Marcus shouted, dropping his mop bucket with a crash that echoed through the marble hallway. The executive boardroom doors stood wide open, and through them Marcus could see chaos unfolding. Alexandra Whitmore, the millionaire CEO of Whitmore Capital, lay collapsed on the polished oak floor, her lips shifting from pink to a terrifying shade of purple. 7 people in suits worth more than Marcus earned in 6 months stood frozen around her like expensive statues, their mouths hanging open, their phones clutched uselessly in their manicured hands. "Someone do something," a woman shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. But nobody moved, not a single one of them. Marcus didn't think. His body reacted before his brain could catch up. He pushed through the boardroom doors, his worn sneakers squeaking against the floor as he dropped to his knees. Beside the woman who, just minutes earlier, had walked past him in the hallway without so much as a glance. Marcus was 34 years old, a single father working the night shift as a janitor in downtown Philadelphia. He had exactly $73 in his checking account, a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie waiting for him at home with their elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, and a free CPR certificate he'd earned 2 years ago at the community center just to get the food voucher that came with it. He never imagined he'd actually use it. Certainly not like this. "Miss Whitmore, can you hear me?" His voice came out steadier than he felt. No pulse, no breathing. Her chest wasn't moving. Marcus tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and leaned down to give 2 rescue breaths. Behind him, someone gasped in horror. "Oh my God, is he kissing her? Get him away from her. That's disgusting. Someone call security. Now." A sharp pain exploded across Marcus's back as something hard, maybe a briefcase, slammed into him. He grunted but didn't stop. His hands locked together over her sternum, and he began compressions, counting out loud through gritted teeth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another blow struck his shoulder. Someone grabbed at his shirt, trying to yank him backward. Their expensive cologne choked him, but Marcus shook them off and kept pressing, kept counting, kept breathing for her. "You filthy janitor, don't you dare touch her with your—" "She's not breathing," Marcus roared, his voice cutting through their panic like a blade. "Either help me or get out of my way." They didn't help. They just stood there, horrified and helpless, watching a poor black man in a janitor's uniform put his mouth on their millionaire boss. 27, 28, 29, 30. 2 more breaths. Marcus's arms burned, his back throbbed where they'd hit him, sweat dripped down his temples. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, because nobody else was going to save her. Suddenly, Alexandra's chest jerked violently. She coughed once, then sucked in air, like someone breaking through the surface of deep water. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, but alive. She was alive. Marcus collapsed backward onto his heels, his entire body shaking, his lungs burning as badly as hers probably were. Around him, the executives finally sprang into motion, swarming her with concern they should have shown 5 minutes earlier. "Alexandra, oh thank God. Stay with us. The ambulance is on the way. You're going to be okay." The paramedics arrived within minutes, lifting Alexandra onto a stretcher and rushing her out. One of them paused long, enough to ask, "Who performed CPR?" "I did," Marcus said quietly, still on the floor, still catching his breath. A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward, his face twisted with something that looked disturbingly like disgust. His name badge read, "Tyler Harrison, Chief Financial Officer." "What's your name?" he demanded. "Marcus. Marcus Williams. I'm a janitor here." Tyler's jaw tightened. "You put your mouth on Miss Whitmore." Marcus blinked, disbelief flooding through him. "She wasn't breathing. I saved her life." "We'll be reviewing the security footage," Tyler said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "Don't come back to this building until HR contacts you, do you understand?" The room went silent. Marcus looked around at the faces staring back at him. Not one showed gratitude, not one showed relief. They looked at him like he'd done something wrong, Like his hands, his breath, his very existence, had contaminated their precious CEO instead of saving her life. Marcus stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. He picked up his mop bucket with trembling hands and walked out of that boardroom, each step heavier than the last. Behind him, the whispers began immediately. Did you see what he did? That looked like more than CPR to me. We should file a report. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the moment those boardroom doors closed behind him, his entire life was about to shatter. And the worst part? He still believed that doing the right thing would somehow protect him. If you're curious to see how badly things can go wrong when a poor man dares to save a rich woman's life, you might want to stick around for what happens next. Because this story? It's just getting started. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at the tiny kitchen table in his studio apartment, staring at his phone like it might explode. Sophie was curled up on the couch behind him, her small body rising and falling with each peaceful breath, completely unaware that her father's world was quietly collapsing around them. By morning, HR still hadn't called. That should have been his first warning. He showed up for his shift anyway because that's what responsible people did. They showed up, they did their jobs, they kept their heads down, and trusted that the truth would protect them. The security guard at the front entrance didn't even let him through the revolving door. Can't let you in, man, the guard said, not meeting Marcus's eyes. Orders from upstairs. Marcus's stomach dropped. What orders? I work here. Not anymore, apparently. The guard finally looked at him, and Marcus saw something uncomfortably close to pity in his expression. You need to go to HR. They're in the annex building, 2 blocks west. The walk to the HR office felt like a funeral march. Marcus's work boots felt heavier with each step, his mouth dry, his mind racing through every possible explanation that didn't end with him losing everything. The HR representative was a middle-aged white woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to his neighbor Mrs. Chen, who sat behind a pristine desk with her hands folded like a principal about to suspend a student. Mr. Williams, please sit. Marcus sat. The chair was too low, forcing him to look up at her. He wondered if that was intentional. Patricia slid a manila envelope across the desk. Your employment with Whitmore Capital has been terminated effective immediately. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. Terminated? Why? What did I do? The company has determined that your conduct during yesterday's incident was inappropriate and violated several workplace policies regarding physical contact with executives. Marcus felt his entire body go cold. Inappropriate? I performed CPR. She wasn't breathing. I saved her life. Patricia's expression didn't change. She could have been reading a grocery list. The security footage has been reviewed. Your actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, crossed professional boundaries. Miss Whitmore is a high-profile individual, and the optics of the situation are problematic. Optics? Marcus's voice cracked. She was dying. What was I supposed to do, let her die so the optics looked better? We're offering you 2 weeks of severance pay, Patricia continued, completely ignoring his question. Sign here to acknowledge receipt and agree not to discuss this matter publicly or pursue legal action. Marcus stared at the paper in front of him. 2 weeks. That was it. That was what his daughter's survival was worth. That was what doing the right thing earned him. And if I don't sign? Patricia's smile was thin and sharp as a paper cut. Then you leave with nothing, and will be forced to pursue charges for assault. The word hung in the air between them like poison gas. Assault, Marcus repeated slowly, tasting the word, hating how it felt in his mouth. You placed your hands and mouth on an unconscious woman without her consent. Legally speaking, that could be interpreted as, I know what assault means, Marcus interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. I also know what CPR means. And I know what would have happened if I hadn't done it. Patricia pushed the paper closer. Sign, Mr. Williams. This is a generous offer considering the circumstances. Marcus signed. Not because he believed them. Not because he thought it was fair. He signed because $73 in his bank account and a 6-year-old daughter who needed to eat. and sometimes survival meant swallowing injustice whole and hoping it didn't poison you from the inside out. He walked out of that office with his final paycheck, a box containing his extra uniform and work gloves, and the crushing realization that heroism only counted when it came from the right kind of person. By the time he got home, his phone was exploding with notifications. Someone had leaked a still frame from the security footage. The image showed Marcus leaning over Alexandra Whitmore, his face close to hers, their lips nearly touching. Without context, without sound, without the understanding that he was literally breathing life back into her lungs, it looked exactly like what they wanted people to think it looked like. The caption read, "Janitor assaults unconscious CEO during medical emergency. Whitmore Capital takes swift action." The comments were worse. Disgusting. He saw an opportunity and took it. This is why you can't trust these people around vulnerable women. Thank God they fired him before he could do it again. Marcus read each word like swallowing broken glass. By evening, the post had been shared 14,000 times. By midnight, it was 27,000. Local news picked it up. A viral Twitter thread dissected every frame of the blurry footage, turning his desperate attempt to save a life into evidence of predatory behavior. Sophie asked him why people were saying mean things about him on Mrs. Chen's iPad. He told her people sometimes got confused about what really happened. He told her everything would be okay. Another lie he was getting too good at telling. That week, Marcus applied to 11 jobs. Gas stations, grocery stores, warehouses, overnight security positions, anything that would hire someone with a high school diploma and a strong back. Every single place said the same thing. "We'll call you." None of them did. On the 8th day, he finally got an interview at a discount cleaning service on the edge of town. The manager, a heavyset man named Rick with a mustache that looked like it belonged in a 1970s cop show, looked Marcus up and down and said, "You're that guy, aren't you? The one from the news?" Marcus's throat tightened. "Yes, sir. But if you look at the full video—" "Don't matter what the full video shows," Rick interrupted, not unkindly. "Matters what people think they saw. And what they think is that you're trouble. I can't afford trouble, kid. Sorry." By the second week, Marcus's savings were gone. Mrs. Chen started bringing over extra food, claiming she'd accidentally cooked too much, which they both knew was a lie. Sophie's school called to ask if everything was okay at home because she'd been unusually quiet in class. Marcus assured them everything was fine. Another lie. On day 17, the electricity was shut off. On day 19, the landlord slipped an eviction notice under the charter. On day 21, Marcus sat in the dark apartment with Sophie asleep beside him and realized he was out of options. He had saved a woman's life, and they had destroyed his for it. But what none of them knew, what none of those smug executives sipping champagne in their glass towers could possibly understand, was that Marcus had grown up poor. He'd grown up black in a city that treated both of those things like crimes. He'd learned early that the world didn't give you second chances, so you had to make your own. And he'd learned something else too. People who underestimate you always leave themselves wide open. Marcus opened his laptop, the screen's glow illuminating his face in the darkness. He pulled up the security footage that had been leaked online. He watched it once, then twice, then a third time. This time, he wasn't watching himself. He was watching them. The executives, their faces, their reactions, the way Tyler Harrison had pulled him away, the way Patricia had called it assault. They thought he was broken. They thought he'd disappear quietly, fade back into whatever invisible corner poor black men were supposed to occupy when they'd outlived their usefulness. They thought wrong. And somewhere high above the city in a private hospital room, Alexandra Whitmore was waking up for the first time since her collapse, asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Starting with the most dangerous question of all. Who saved my life? Marcus had always believed that the truth would eventually surface on its own, like oil rising through water. He'd been wrong about a lot of things in his life, but that might have been the most expensive mistake of all. The truth didn't rise, it drowned, unless someone pulled it back up by force. 3. Weeks after losing his job, Marcus sat in the cramped back office of a community legal aid center in South Philadelphia. The walls were covered with peeling motivational posters that had stopped being motivational sometime around 2009. Across from him sat a woman who looked like she'd been born. Exhausted but refused to quit anyway. Attorney Keisha Morrison was 42, wore a blazer with frayed sleeves, and had won more wrongful termination cases in Philadelphia than anyone else willing to work for free. She'd agreed to meet with Marcus only because Mrs. Chen's nephew worked as a paralegal in the office next door and had vouched for him. "Let me be clear about something," Keisha said, tapping her pen against the stack of papers Marcus had brought. "Wrongful termination cases are hard. Wrongful termination cases against billion-dollar companies are harder. And wrongful termination cases where the fired employee is black, male, and accused of inappropriate contact with a white woman?" She leaned back in her chair. "Those are nearly impossible." Marcus nodded slowly. "So you're saying I should give up?" "I'm saying you need to understand what you're up against." Keisha opened her laptop and turned it toward him. On the screen was the viral image of him performing CPR, frozen at the worst possible angle. This is what a jury will see. This is what a judge will see. And unless we have something that completely obliterates their narrative, we lose. "I have the truth." "The truth," Keisha said gently, "is whatever the person with the most money says it is. You know that already, or you wouldn't be here." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small black device about the size of a deck of cards. "What's that?" Keisha asked. "Body camera," Marcus said. "I started wearing it 6 months ago after another janitor got accused of stealing someone's laptop. He didn't do it, but they fired him anyway because he couldn't prove he wasn't in that office. I decided I wasn't going to let that happen to me." Keisha sat up straighter. "You're telling me you were wearing a camera when you performed CPR on Alexandra Whitmore?" "Yes, ma'am. Audio and video, everything." Marcus set the camera on the desk between them. "I haven't watched it yet. I was afraid if I did, I might do something stupid." For the first time since Marcus had entered the office, Keisha Morrison smiled. Not a polite smile, not a sympathetic smile, a predator smile. The kind that said she'd just smelled blood in the water. "Mr. Williams," she said, reaching for the camera, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation." Over the next hour, they watched the footage 3 times. Every frame was damning for Whitmore Capital. The audio captured everything: the executive's panic, Marcus's calm instructions to himself as he performed CPR, the sound of someone hitting him while he tried to save a woman's life, and most importantly, Tyler Harrison's voice saying, "Get him off her, that's disgusting." The camera also caught what happened after the paramedics left. Tyler and Patricia Chen, the HR representative, standing in the hallway outside the boardroom. "We need to control this narrative immediately," Tyler said. On the recording, his voice low but clear. "If it gets out that a janitor saved her life, we'll have a PR nightmare. Better to frame it as inappropriate contact and cut him loose before he becomes a hero story." Patricia's response was equally clear. "I'll draft the termination paperwork tonight." "What reason should I use?" "Inappropriate physical contact with a senior executive. Make it vague enough that people assume the worst. And leak that photo to the right blogs. The optics will do the rest." Keisha paused the video and looked at Marcus with something close to awe. "Do you understand what you have here?" "Evidence?" "A smoking gun," she corrected. "This isn't just proof that you did nothing wrong. This is proof that they conspired to destroy you deliberately, maliciously, and with full knowledge that you'd saved her life. This is a federal lawsuit waiting to happen." Marcus felt, yes, something shift in his chest. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile. This was something harder, something that had been forged in the 3 weeks of hell he'd just survived. This was certainty. "What do we do now?" he asked. Keisha's smile widened. Now we build a case so airtight that Whitmore Capital's lawyers will beg us to settle before we embarrass them in court." "But Marcus," her expression turned serious, We can't show our hand too early. They think you're beaten. They think you've slunk off into whatever corner poor people disappear into when rich people crush them. We need them to keep thinking that. So we stay quiet. For now. We document everything. Every nasty comment online, every job rejection, every bill you can't pay because they took away your income. We build a record of damages so extensive that when we finally reveal this footage, the jury won't just feel sorry for you. They'll be furious. Marcus thought about Sophie, about the eviction notice, about the electricity that got turned off, and the shame of explaining to his daughter why they were eating dinner by candlelight like it was a fun camping trip instead of poverty. How long? He asked. 4 weeks. Maybe 5. We need to time this perfectly. And Marcus? Keisha leaned forward. They're going to keep coming for you. Tyler Harrison doesn't strike me as the type who lets go easily. When people like him feel threatened, they escalate. You need to be ready for things to get worse before they get better. She was right. 2 days later, Marcus's face appeared on a local news segment about workplace safety and harassment. They didn't use his name, but they used the photo, and they brought in an expert who explained how difficult it was for companies to protect executives from employees who might take advantage of emergency situations. 3 days after that, someone spray-painted "pervert" across the door of his apartment building. The landlord blamed Marcus and added a cleaning fee to his already unpaid rent. And exactly 1 week after Marcus met with Keisha Morrison, Tyler Harrison made his biggest mistake yet. He sent Alexandra Whitmore a carefully edited version of the security footage, along with a memo explaining that the situation had been handled appropriately and that she shouldn't worry about the inappropriate actions of the former janitor who had been properly terminated for violation of company policy. What Tyler didn't know was that Alexandra Whitmore had been asking questions. A lot of questions. The kind of questions that made lawyers nervous and executives sweat. And when she watched Tyler's edited footage, something inside her twisted with a recognition she couldn't quite name. She'd been unconscious when Marcus saved her life. But her body remembered. Her lungs remembered. And somewhere deep in her mind, beneath the fog of cardiac arrest and near death, she remembered a voice saying, "Come on, breathe, don't you dare die on me." That wasn't the voice of a predator. That was the voice of someone fighting to keep her alive. Alexandra picked up her phone and made a call that would change everything. But Marcus didn't know that yet. He only knew that he had a weapon now, hidden and sharp and waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. He only knew that Tyler Harrison and everyone else who'd underestimated him had made a fatal error. They'd assumed he'd stay down. They'd assumed he'd accept his destruction as the natural order of things. They'd forgotten that the most dangerous person in any fight is the one who has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. And Marcus Williams was just getting started. Alexandra Whitmore had built a fortune by trusting her instincts, and right now every instinct she had was screaming that something was deeply, catastrophically wrong. She sat in her penthouse office, the edited security footage frozen on her screen, and replayed the memo Tyler Harrison had sent her for the 3rd time. Situation handled appropriately. Former janitor. Violation of company policy. The words felt slippery, evasive, like someone trying very hard to make her stop asking questions. So she asked more. It took exactly 4 phone calls to find someone willing to tell her the truth. The night shift supervisor, a woman named Gloria, who'd worked at Whitmore Capital for 19 years, finally cracked. "Miss Whitmore, I'm only telling you this because it's been eating me alive," Gloria said, her voice shaking over the phone. "That man saved your life. Marcus Williams. He did CPR for nearly 8 minutes while your executive stood there doing nothing. Some of them even hit him, tried to pull him off you. And then Mr. Harrison had him fired the next day and leaked that photo to make him look like a predator." The silence that followed was so complete Alexandra could hear her own heartbeat. "Where is Marcus Williams now?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I don't know, ma'am. But I heard he's been blacklisted. Can't get work anywhere. I heard he's about to lose his apartment." Alexandra ended the call and sat very still for a long moment. Then she stood, grabbed her coat, and made a decision that would detonate like a bomb through the carefully constructed lie Tyler Harrison had built. She was going to find Marcus Williams, and then she was going to burn down everyone who'd tried to destroy him. But Marcus found her first. 4 days later, Tyler Harrison walked into his office to find an envelope waiting on his desk. Inside was a single flash drive and a note written in neat handwriting. "You should watch this before tomorrow's board meeting. A friend." Tyler plugged in the drive, annoyed. The video started playing. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. Then his own voice filled the room, crystal clear, captured by a camera he'd never known was there. "We need to control this narrative immediately. If it gets out that a janitor saved her life, we'll have a PR nightmare. Better to frame it as inappropriate contact and cut him loose before he becomes a hero story." Tyler's blood turned to ice. The video continued. Patricia from HR. "What reason should I use?" Tyler's response. "Inappropriate physical contact with a senior executive. Make it vague enough that people assume the worst and leak that photo to the right blogs. The optics will do the rest." Tyler grabbed his phone with shaking hands and called Patricia. "Did you get an envelope?" "Yes," she whispered. "Tyler, what do we do?" "Nothing," he snapped. "This is probably just a bluff, some disgruntled employee trying to scare us." "A bluff?" Patricia's voice rose. "We're on tape admitting to conspiracy. We're—" "Shut up," Tyler hissed. "Don't say another word over the phone. I'll handle this." But Tyler Harrison couldn't handle what happened next. The following morning, Marcus Williams walked into the Whitmore Capitol building flanked by two people, attorney Keisha Morrison and Alexandra Whitmore herself. The lobby went silent. Security guards froze mid-step. Executives on their way to meetings stopped and stared. Because the image of Alexandra Whitmore, the woman whose company had publicly destroyed Marcus for inappropriate contact, now standing beside him with her hand protectively on his shoulder, shattered every narrative they'd been fed. "Good morning," Alexandra said, her voice carrying across the marble lobby. "We're here for the emergency board meeting, which I called 30 minutes ago." Tyler Harrison was already in the boardroom when they entered, his face pale but defiant. 5 other board members sat around the table, confusion written across their expensive faces. "Alexandra, what is this about?" asked board member Richard Chen. Tyler said there was an urgent matter requiring immediate attention. "There is," Alexandra replied calmly. She nodded to Keisha, who connected a laptop to the massive screen at the front of the room. "I need all of you to watch something. And then, we're going to discuss exactly what kind of company we've been running." The body camera footage played in its entirety. Every second of Marcus fighting to save Alexandra's life. Every blow he took. Every slur hurled at him. And then the hallway conversation between Tyler and Patricia. Their conspiracy laid bare in perfect audio quality. When it finished, the silence in that room was suffocating. "That man," Alexandra said, pointing to Marcus, "saved my life, while you all stood frozen, while some of you actively tried to stop him. And then Tyler Harrison decided that protecting this company's image was more important than protecting the truth." Tyler stood abruptly. "This is a clear violation of privacy laws. That recording was made without consent. It's inadmissible." "In a criminal trial, perhaps," Keisha Morrison interrupted smoothly. "But this isn't a criminal trial, Mr. Harrison. This is a civil lawsuit for wrongful termination, defamation, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And in civil court, this footage is absolutely admissible, especially since Mr. Williams was wearing the camera in plain sight as part of his work uniform. You just never noticed him long enough to see it." She slid a document across the table. "This is our lawsuit. We're filing it in exactly 2 hours. Unless, of course, Whitmore Capital would like to discuss a settlement." Richard Chen picked up the document, his face growing redder with each page. "Tyler, did you actually do this?" "I was protecting the company." Tyler's voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what the media would do with a story about a janitor saving our CEO's life? We'd look incompetent, vulnerable. We'd look human. Alexandra said coldly. We'd look like a company where someone doing the right thing gets celebrated instead of crucified. But you decided that was bad for business. Miss Whitmore, another board member, Janitor, spoke up carefully. What exactly do you want here? Alexandra looked at Marcus. He'd been quiet this entire time, standing with his arms crossed, watching Tyler Harrison slowly realize that the invisible man he'd destroyed was about to become the most visible person in America. Mr. Williams, Alexandra said gently. What do you want? Marcus stepped forward. For weeks, he'd imagined this moment, screaming at Tyler, watching him grovel, making him feel every ounce of humiliation and fear Marcus had endured. But standing here now, seeing Tyler Harrison's career imploding in real time, Marcus felt something unexpected. Pity. Not forgiveness. Not even satisfaction. Just the cold recognition that Tyler had destroyed himself the moment he'd decided Marcus wasn't worth the truth. I want my name cleared, Marcus said quietly. Publicly, I want a formal apology from this company, published in every outlet that ran that photo. I want Tyler Harrison and Patricia Chen fired for cause, with no severance. And I want to be involved in creating a new company policy that protects employees who act in good faith during emergencies. He paused, his eyes locking onto Tyler's. And I want you to know that I didn't do this because I'm cruel. I did it because somebody has to teach people like you that we're not invisible, we're not disposable, and we damn sure don't disappear just because you want us to. If you've ever wondered what justice really looks like, stick around, because what happened next changed everything, not just for Marcus, but for every person who'd ever been told they were too small, too poor, or too powerless to fight back. Tyler Harrison was fired that afternoon. Patricia Chen resigned before they could terminate her. The settlement Whitmore Capital offered Marcus was substantial enough that Keisha Morrison actually laughed when she read the number. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. Because Marcus Williams was about to learn that sometimes, when you fight for yourself, you end up fighting for everyone. 6 months after that boardroom confrontation, Marcus Williams stood in front of a crowd of 300 people at the Philadelphia Convention Center, wearing a suit that actually fit him and holding a microphone that didn't shake in his hands anymore. My name is Marcus Williams, he began, his voice steady and clear. And a year ago, I was fired for saving someone's life. The audience went silent. They knew the story. Everyone knew the story by now. It had been covered by every major news outlet in the country. The viral photo that had once destroyed him had been replaced by a new image. Marcus and Alexandra Whitmore shaking hands in front of Whitmore Capital, with the headline, CEO thanks man who saved her life, exposes corporate conspiracy. But what the headlines didn't capture was everything that came after. The settlement from Whitmore Capital had been substantial enough to change Marcus's life completely. He'd paid off every debt, moved Sophie into a safe neighborhood with good schools, and set up a college fund that would ensure she'd never have to worry about money the way he had. Mrs. Chen now lived in a comfortable assisted living facility that Marcus visited every Sunday, bringing her favorite dumplings and stories about Sophie's soccer games. But Marcus hadn't stopped there. With Alexandra Whitmore's support and Keisha Morrison's guidance, he'd done something that terrified him more than confronting Tyler Harrison ever had. He'd used his platform to speak up, not just for himself, but for every worker who'd ever been told they were too small, too poor, or too invisible to matter. He'd testified before the Philadelphia City Council about workplace protections. He'd partnered with labor unions to create programs ensuring that frontline workers, janitors, security guards, and cafeteria staff had access to legal representation when companies tried to silence them. And he'd become the face of a movement that was spreading across the country, reminding corporations that the people they treated as invisible were the ones keeping their buildings running. The thing about being invisible, Marcus continued, looking out at the crowd, is that people forget you're watching. They forget you're listening. They forget that you matter. And when you finally stand up and make them see you, they panic. because they realize that they've been cruel to someone who was paying attention the whole time. The crowd erupted in applause. In the front row, Sophie sat next to Mrs. Chen, beaming with pride. Beside them, Alexandra Whitmore clapped harder than anyone else. As for Tyler Harrison, well, his story went in a very different direction. He'd been fired without severance, exactly as Marcus had requested. His name became synonymous with corporate corruption and racial bias. Every company he applied to rejected him once they Googled his name and saw the conspiracy footage. His LinkedIn profile, once full of impressive credentials and glowing recommendations, now sat dormant. The last post dated the day before everything fell apart. The last Marcus heard, Tyler was working as a business consultant out of his apartment, desperately trying to rebrand himself while the internet refused to forget what he'd done. Patricia Chen had moved to another state and changed careers entirely. Neither of them would ever work in corporate management again. But Marcus found that their suffering didn't bring him the satisfaction he'd once imagined. Revenge, he'd learned, wasn't about watching your enemies fail. It was about succeeding so completely that their betrayal became irrelevant. The real victory came 3 months later, when Alexandra Whitmore announced a complete restructuring of Whitmore Capital's employee policies. The new director of employee relations and workplace equity was a familiar face, Marcus Williams, whose first act was to implement mandatory bias training for all executives and create an anonymous reporting system for workplace injustices that bypassed HR entirely and went straight to the board. On Marcus's first day in his new office, 15 floors above where he used to mop, he found a package on his desk. Inside was his old janitor's uniform, cleaned and pressed, with a note from Alexandra. Never forget where you came from. Never forget who tried to stop you. And never stop making sure no one else has to fight this hard for basic dignity. Marcus hung the uniform in his office, right next to his law degree, because he'd enrolled in night school the month after the settlement cleared. If Keisha Morrison could fight for people like him, he figured he could learn to do the same. A year after that boardroom meeting, Marcus gave a TED Talk that went viral. 2 years later, he published a book called Invisible No More that became a bestseller. 3 years later, he was consulting with Fortune 500 companies on workplace equity, commanding fees that would have seemed impossible when he was pushing a mop bucket for minimum wage. And through it all, Sophie grew up watching her father prove that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is still the right thing to do. On the 5-year anniversary of the day, Marcus saved Alexandra's life. The two of them sat in a coffee shop in Philadelphia. Far from the glass towers and executive boardrooms, just two people who'd survived something neither of them had expected. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been wearing that camera? Alexandra asked. Marcus stirred his coffee slowly. Every day, I think about how close I came to just disappearing, like I never existed at all. But you didn't disappear. No. Marcus smiled. I learned something better. I learned that the best revenge isn't making your enemies suffer. It's building something so powerful that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. Tyler Harrison tried to erase me. Instead, I became impossible to ignore. Alexandra raised her coffee cup. To being impossible to ignore. Marcus clinked his cup against hers. And to never forgetting the people who tried to make us disappear. The truth is, Marcus Williams could have stayed quiet. He could have taken the settlement money, moved away, and never looked back. But he'd learned something in that boardroom, bleeding and exhausted and fighting to save someone who would later be used as a weapon against him. Silence protects the powerful. Speaking up protects everyone else. So if you've ever been told you're too small to make a difference, too poor to deserve respect, or too invisible to matter, remember Marcus Williams. Remember that the janitor they tried to destroy became the voice they couldn't silence. Remember that justice doesn't always come from the system. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people who refuse to accept that cruelty is just the way things are. And if you've been inspired by this story, if you've ever fought back against injustice or stood up when staying quiet would have been easier, Drop a comment below and share your story. Because the world needs to hear it. The world needs to remember that we're not invisible. We're just waiting for our moment to be impossible to ignore. Marcus Williams saved a life and lost everything. Then he saved himself and changed everything. That's not just his story. It's a reminder that the most dangerous person in any room is the one you underestimated. And sometimes, the best revenge is proving them all wrong. 10 years after Marcus Williams saved Alexandra Whitmore's life, the story had become legend. Not the sanitized, corporate-approved version that companies like to tell at diversity seminars. The real story. The messy, uncomfortable truth about what happens when systems fail and ordinary people refuse to accept it. Marcus was 44 now. His daughter Sophie in her second year at Penn Law School, studying employment law with a ferocity that made even her professors nervous. She'd grown up watching her father transform from invisible janitor to one of the most influential voices in workplace justice, and she'd decided early that she wanted to finish what he'd started. "Dad," she said one evening over dinner at their comfortable home in a neighborhood that used to feel impossible, "Professor Chen asked if you'd come speak to our employment discrimination class." Marcus smiled. "Patricia Chen's daughter?" "Granddaughter, actually. She said her grandmother still regrets what happened, sends you a card every year apologizing." Marcus nodded slowly. Patricia had indeed reached out over the years, her remorse genuine even if forgiveness wasn't something Marcus felt obligated to offer. Some wounds heal, some just stop bleeding. The Whitmore Foundation, established 3 years after the lawsuit, had become the largest worker advocacy organization in the country. Alexandra had stepped down as CEO of Whitmore Capital to run it full-time, and Marcus served as executive director. Together, they'd helped secure protections for over 50,000 workers, prosecuted hundreds of wrongful termination cases, and changed employment law in 17 states. But the impact went deeper than numbers. In Philadelphia alone, 12 major corporations had implemented the Williams Protocol, a comprehensive system ensuring that employees at all levels could report injustices without fear of retaliation. The protocol included mandatory body cameras for security and facilities staff, anonymous reporting systems that bypassed HR, and quarterly audits conducted by third-party advocates. Tyler Harrison's name had become shorthand for corporate arrogance. Business schools taught his case as a cautionary tale about what happens when executives prioritize optics over ethics. He'd written a memoir titled The Fall, attempting to rehabilitate his image, but it had been universally panned as self-serving revisionism. Last Marcus heard, Tyler was living in Arizona, working in his brother-in-law's insurance office, his corner office days permanently behind him. The body camera Marcus had worn that day now sat in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, part of an exhibit on workplace justice and civil rights. Beside it was his old janitor's uniform and the viral photo that had once destroyed him, now recontextured with the full story of conspiracy and corruption it had hidden. Marcus gave speeches now, sometimes to crowds of thousands, but his favorite talks were the small ones, at community centers and union halls, where he sat with janitors and security, guards and cafeteria workers, the people still living in the invisible world he'd escaped. "You matter," he'd tell them, looking into eyes that had been trained to look down, not because of what you do for them, not because of what you're worth to their bottom line. You matter because you're human. And the moment you understand that, really understand it down in your bones, you become dangerous to every system built on making you feel small. One young janitor, maybe 23, working night shifts while putting himself through community college, raised his hand during a Q&A. "Mr. Williams, I wear a body camera now because of your story, but I'm scared. What if something happens and I have to use it? What if they come after me like they came after you?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment, remembering who he'd been at 23. Scared, invisible, convinced that keeping his head down was the same thing as staying safe. "They might," Marcus said honestly. "But here's what I learned. They're going to come after you whether you stand up or not. The difference is whether you're standing or kneeling when they do." The room erupted in applause. The young man nodded, something shifting in his expression. Marcus recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror 10 years ago. That night, Marcus sat in his home office, looking at the wall covered with photos. Sophie at her law school graduation, Mrs. Chen at her 100th birthday party, Alexandra cutting the ribbon at the foundation's new headquarters, Keisha Morrison, who'd become a federal judge, swearing in at her confirmation hearing, and in the center a framed screenshot from that viral video. Not the edited version that had destroyed him. The full footage, showing him kneeling beside Alexandra Whitmore, counting compressions, refusing to stop even as they hit him. Under the frame, a quote he'd written himself. "They tried to make me invisible. I made myself unforgettable." His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Williams, my name is Jennifer. I'm a night nurse at Philadelphia General. I just watched a video of my supervisor stealing medication and selling it. I'm wearing a body camera I bought after hearing your story. I don't know what to do. Can you help?" Marcus smiled and typed back, "Yes. And you're not alone." Because that was the real revenge he'd learned. Not watching Tyler Harrison fall. Not even the settlements and policy changes and museum exhibits. The real revenge was creating a world where the next Marcus Williams didn't have to fight alone in the dark, hoping somebody would believe him. The real revenge was making sure that when someone chose to do the right thing, the system protected them instead of destroying them. And 10 years later, standing in his office with that text message glowing on his screen, Marcus Williams understood something profound. He hadn't just saved Alexandra Whitmore's life that day in the boardroom. He'd saved his own. And now, one person at a time, he was helping others do the same.